Hello and good morning, CTS267 Section 840 students for the Spring 2017 semester at Anne Arundel Community College. This is the CCNP TSHOOT course, and this morning's video tutorial is going to be a comprehensive, exhaustive look at the Cisco Archive feature. And what the archive feature set allows us to do is it'll allow us to automatically roll back our configurations. We're going to compare and contrast the configure terminal revert command with the reload in command. We're going to talk about when you're making changes on a remote router. And when I mean remote, you can see here we have Siberia. Router 2 is located in DC. That's going to be our quote-unquote local router. And we're going to be making changes to this router in Siberia, right, in the Soviet Union. And so when you're making these remote changes, you want to make sure that if you were to do anything that would cut connectivity off, that you can actually not have to send somebody to Siberia to reload the router for you. In fact, I have a couple of students in the TSHOOT course. They've got some devices literally in Alaska, out in the islands by the international date line, and in Siberia. So that's kind of the use case we're going to be talking about. Now, another thing, and I shared this with my class, is I went ahead and typed up a Cisco Remote Change Control Archive Rollback Contingency Planning document. It's very short, 2 pages, and then just a brief archive template that you could cut and paste and use on your documents. So let's go ahead and dive in here. And so one of the first things that we want to do, right, when we talk about the archive feature, is it's going to allow us to not just automatically at a given time period have a copy of the running config saved off so that if we needed to go back and use it we could, but it's also going to allow us to every time we type in copy running config startup config, or every time we say write memory, it's going to go ahead and it's also going to create an archive copy so that we can do what typically you're going to hear. Cisco says revert, right? In their command syntax, you're going to see the word revert. However, rollback is really what it is. And I think the reason they probably used revert and not rollback is that Juniper, which has had this feature, I think for way longer than Cisco's. I think Juniper had this from the very beginning, is they have a rollback feature, which is very, very popular. Cisco didn't get this until around 12.3, I want to say, and then even then, it was quite buggy. So, all right, what's the first thing that we need to do, right? So here's our Siberia router. We've got this router deployed. I want to make sure that I've got the archive feature set up on here so that I can use the config terminal revert command. And I want to make sure real quickly before we get into this archive configuration to understand that the config revert, right, that's inextricably linked to the archive feature. So in other words, what I'm saying there is if I was to say config terminal revert, and I know we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, timer 4, and hit enter, you can see that I can't use this great feature unless I have the archive feature set turned on, right? Because this rollback, right, the rollback that's going to take place, which is simply taking the most recently saved configuration that we know to be good and putting it on top of the configuration that we're changing, we can't do that without the archive feature set on. So step number 1 is always going to be to see, if I type show archive, is the archive feature set on? And we can see here that it's not. Another way that you could check to see is you could say show run section archive, and that would show you if it's in the running config. But definitively, you're going to say show archive, and it's going to tell me archive feature set not enabled. So right now, I can't do the config terminal revert command. And basically what this is saying here is I want to do a conf t, which is typically when you go into global config, but what I'm saying is that I want it to revert back to the most recently previous saved configuration in 4 minutes unless I confirm that I'm happy with the configuration. So we're going to set archive up and let's walk through each of these use cases here. So let's go ahead and get into global config. And I'm simply going to say archive. And you can see there's no options for archive to get into the archive sub-configuration mode. Now, once we're in here, we're going to be presented with a whole host of options. And real quickly, I'm running 15.3 code here. But again, any 15 code, you're going to have the archive feature set up. And this is on routers as well as on switches. So here we go with all these commands. So you can see, let's start at the bottom and work our way up. So write memory, enable automatic backup generation during write memory. So what this means is if you type, and what it doesn't say is if you like copy run start, that will work as well as write memory. So if I was to try to say write memory, and we're going to get an error message here, but again, I'm going to walk us into sort of some of the common mistakes that get made. So I'm going to say write memory because I see that, I'm like, yeah, I definitely want to make sure that every time I save my config, that it adds that configuration to the archive. And you can see here that it tells me the path command needs to be configured first. So I look up here and it says path for backups. And then maybe I think, well, okay, well, let me just set the time period. Right now, this is sort of the auto magic feature here, where based on the time period that I give it in minutes, that many minutes, so if I was to say time period 60, every hour this Cisco router is going to take the current running config, it's going to back it up to wherever I tell the path statement to back it up to, and then it's going to automatically back it up to that location. Right? Now 60 is probably a little aggressive. I don't think you need a copy of the config every 60 seconds. When we talk about the maximum argument, right? The default is 10. You can only keep a maximum of 14. And this is where I really enjoy the Juniper feature, the rollback feature, is that it saves 50 copies of configurations, right? So you can back up 50 copies instead of just 14. But again, 14 is better than 0, right? It's better to have this this feature set with 14 copies of the last 14 configurations than 0. Okay, so I'm going to say time period. I'm going to say 43,200, which I believe to be 86,400. So this should be 30 days, so once a month. But again, what do we get? The path command needs to be configured first. So the takeaway here, and let me see if I say maximum, do a question mark, you can see the default is 10. What if I say 14? The path command needs to be... So again, the takeaway here is you have to configure the path argument first in order to get into some of these more these additional features that you can tack on here with the archive configuration setup. So let's configure the path, and I'm also going to show you the most common mistake that gets made. So I'm going to say path, we'll do a question mark, excuse me, and you can see we've got all kinds of options here. I can save it to the local flash drive, which is what I'm going to do in this case. And in the event that you're doing this on a router in Siberia, right, so we're kind of pretending that this router's in Siberia, if you fear that you may lose WAN connectivity and you don't have another way to get to the FTP server, which might be at your data center, or the HTTP, HTTPS, or the RCP, SCP, TFTP, all these remote options to save the configuration, to have it automatically archive the configuration to, if you lose WAN connectivity to these options, FTP, HTTP, etc., you're not going to be able to revert the config back. So I'm a big fan of putting it on flash. Very rarely do the flash cards fail. At least in my experience, I haven't had flash cards fail too often. And again, since we're doing this remotely, and you can only send it with the archive. I'm not saying that you couldn't come up with like some sort of an EEM script that kicks off a tickle script that then fires the config to the TFTP server or the SCP server, whatever the case may be. But with the archive feature set, the way it stands is you get one choice as to where you're going to save these configs off, and you'll see that right now. So if I was to say do dir, let's see, what do I have going on here? Well, I've got this directory vault, but what if I say do make dir, and I'll just say backup _ configs. So then do dir, do we have that directory there? So you can see on the flash card, and this is just a 128 meg flash card in this Cisco 1841 router, and you can see we've got quite a few bytes that are free here, right? And when we save it off, you'll see the size of the config, and you do simple math would let you figure out, how many months you're going to be able to keep backups for. But again, this is a 128 meg flash card that's in there. And it's going to give us plenty of space. So we've got, what do we have? 73 meg, 123. So 76 megabytes is still free on this 128 megabyte flash card that's in this router. So I've created the directory here in or on the flash card. So now we're going to go ahead and say path flash : and this is the biggest mistake that gets made. Backup underscore configs, and then hit enter. Right, and I'm going to we'll do this. It's easy to fix, but I want you to see what's going to happen here. So I've just said path flash : backup underscore configs, and you're probably thinking, oh, awesome, it's going to save the configs off into that directory. So let's say do show archive, because I've just configured the path. What does it look like right now? Well, here we go. The maximum archive configuration allowed is save configs is 10. And that was what I was saying. That's the default. There's currently no configuration saved. The next archive file is going to be named flash : and then it gives the name of the directory and then a dash and the timestamp. Now the timestamp is automatically in there. It has to have that in there in order to differentiate the timing, right? The most recent one that's been saved. So Cisco by default is going to put that in there. I'm going to show you how you can move the location of the timestamp, but you can't get rid of it. And then it's going to give us this -0, right? Because it's going to start at 0, and then it's going to go to 1, and then to 2. So let's go ahead. Let's set this up so that it's going to start auto-magically saving things off for us when we issue the write memory command. So now let's come back to write memory. Right? You can see that there's no options to it. I simply type write memory. If I say do show run section archive, here's all we have right now. The mandatory path attribute, the mandatory path statement that we have to have. And now I've added in write memory. So what does that mean? So what if I say do write memory? So I'm copying the running configuration to NVRAM, right? That non-volatile random access memory that is, it's not going to get flushed out when we reload, right? It's going to save it off there. So now if I say do show archive, what just happened? Aha! So now we've got this backup file here. Now you're probably asking yourself, well, what if I don't make any changes? What if I was to say do write memory? Excuse me. What if I were to say do write memory? It's going to copy the configuration. You see it says building the config, and we get this OK. So now when I say do show archive, you're going to see that it doesn't matter. So every time you type write memory, whether I've made intermediate configuration changes or not, it is going to archive off excuse me, the configuration for me. And now you can see that this is where that timestamp feature becomes very important, because other than the timestamp, right, we've got the 0 and the 1. That's really the only way to tell which one was first. So it's going to keep that timestamp in here. So that's another takeaway. When the write memory command is added to the archive configuration, every single time you do this, and what if we were to say do copy, do copy run start. So I'm copy the running config to the startup config, and then let's say do show archive. And there it is. Excuse me. So every time you type write memory or copy running config startup config, it is going to create an archive configuration of the whatever was the current running config that you copied or saved off. Now, let's talk about the error, right? Because I've kind of moved away from the error message. Let's circle back now. So take a look at the names of these files. You're probably thinking, okay, it's putting it in the backup config directory, and the name is going to be -February blah, 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 blah. Because right now, everything, it's working, right? I'm seeing these archives are here. So let me go ahead and say do dir backup underscore configs. Well, that's interesting, right? Because I set it to save the configurations to this directory. However, here's the problem. When I say do dir, it's saving them to the top level directory, right? So to speak, right? This is sort of the root or the top level of the Flash file system. And I have a directory here called backup configs, but the mistake was in the path command, right? That when I put the path command in, and if I were to pull that back up, when I put the path command in, I said save it as backup configs, and then it's going to throw the timestamp on there. In fact, when we said do show archive, it told us as much right here, that the next archive file is going to have that as the name. But that is not what we want. We want these files because you don't want these files to be clogging up the top level directory. At least I don't. I want them put off into a directory so that at the top of the Flash file system, I only see what I'm going to be looking for, right? Maybe it's this tickle script. Obviously, we're going to keep the iOS binary file here, right? So you only want to keep certain things. You don't want it to get all clogged up with tons and tons of configurations that are being backed up. We want them in that directory. So how do we do that? Well, we would simply say path flash colon, and it's going to be backup underscore configs. I said configs / right? That is the path separator telling iOS that you're going to save it into that directory. That / indicates that sort of breaks the name up. So now iOS knows that when I say do write memory and it goes to save it off, it's going to save it off into that backup configs directory. So do dir backup underscore configs, and it's being saved off. And you can see the only thing here is the timestamp, and so we're going to change that here in a second with there's only two options available. We can do it. There's a hostname option, so it'll tag, put the hostname on there for us, and then there's an option to put to move the timestamp around, because maybe we want the timestamp in the middle, or maybe we want it at the beginning. So we can tweak that, and let's do that right now. So you can see that now it's doing what we want it to do. It's putting the configurations in the backup configs directory. So right here at the end, I can actually use a $H to put the host name, followed by $T, excuse me, for the timestamp. Now maybe I want to put a note, or put something in here a little more descriptive. Say $H backup dash config, and then we'll do $T, right? So what should happen is I should have the R1 Siberia host name there, followed with a little backup config description, or mnemonic if you want to call it that, and then the $T for the timestamp, and we'll keep the timestamp at the end. So if I were to say do show run section archive, you should see that you get one choice, right? Because if I had the ability to say path, save it here, and then path, save it over here too, and then path, save it over here too, right now we'd have 3 different setups. But every time you put the path command in, you get one choice, right? So I get one choice as to where I'm going to put these backups. So now let's say do write mem. We're going to save it off, and now let's pull back. And in fact, had I said do show archive, actually, it would have shown me. And that actually I should have ran this command. I should have said show archive first, so that we could see, hey, what is it going to look like? Well, this is what those backup config files are going to look like. And when I say show archive after doing the write memory, you can take a look. R1 Siberia backup config. Now, the reason that you would want to do this, you're probably asking, well, why? Hey, if we're saving it locally, it's obvious that this backup configuration is coming from R1 Siberia. So why even put that in there? Because if it's saved locally, I know that I'm saving it on R1 Siberia. Here's the reason. Remember those other options we have to path. So if you're saving this off to like a huge, epically large repository that you have on a TFTP or an SCP server, if you went with the default and all you had was the timestamp, that is not going to help you at all, right, when you're looking at those configs. So it may cause more confusion to leave it at the default than it would to simply just add in that $T, $H, $T. So again, remember, the archive configuration, we're saving these locally. And so you're probably asking yourself, well, wait a minute, how much space are these configs taking up? So if I was to say again, and actually we could probably pull this back, and we want to do a do dir, and take a look at the directory, because now in this directory, all of these configuration files that are being archived, this is where they're being saved. And now this is a very important point, right? Because this is where it can kind of cause a little confusion. Because you're looking here and you're seeing, well, wait a minute, it's only going to save 10 configurations. What this is referring to, what the 10 is referring to, is right now we have it set up to track the last or the 10 most recent configs in the archive feature. However, once I exceed 10, the first config is going to pop off of the stack, but it's not going to delete it from the directory. So in other words, what I'm saying is, when I say show archive, this number is how many of the most recent archives will I see and can I use, right, with the archive feature set. However, if I've done the write memory command 100 times, there are going to be 100 configs saved into this directory. So these configurations, which are physically being copied onto the flash card, these are not being rotated out, right? And you'll see that. I'm going to leave it at 10 right now, and I'm going to keep doing the write mem command as we move along. You can see. But once we get past 10 and we go to 11, you're going to see this one right here. Remember that, 122-0. That's going to be here, right? Even when we get to the 11th backup and the 12th backup and the 13th, it saves all of them. But again, the size is relatively small. I took a look where I currently work, and I think the worst case scenario we have is a router that's got, I think it's like 7,000 bytes, right? So we're gonna take a look real quickly at the memory, right? The memory requirement. So 7,000 bytes, which is not a lot when we're talking about the size of some of the flash cards that you can get today. So remember, here is how much free space I have. So 76 megs. So if I was to say, if we've got 7,000 bytes, let's pull the calculator up here. And we're going to say that we're automatically, once a month, saving the configuration off. So 7,000, or actually we're going to take the remaining space here. So we'll say 767-180, because we're going to do it in bytes. That's going to be the reference point, 18080. Let's make sure we got that 123, 123. So 76 megabytes of free space. If I divide that by 7,000 bytes, which is, pretty good average size, I could back up, and I'll just round up here, 11,000 months worth of configurations before I fill up that flash card. And again, that's a 128 meg flash card. These are legacy routers. That's a legacy flash card size. If you were to go with like a 1 gig or a 2 gig, I mean, 11,000 months, that's a pretty long time. If I divide that number by 12, that's 913 years. So my guess is that you're either going to have upgraded your router or upgraded the flash card before you hit this 913-year mark. And again, that's all with a 128 meg drive, and with I've got 76 meg left, right? So I've got an iOS in here. Maybe you got some other stuff in there. But again, I think you get the point. Even if I had half of that space available, if I was going to say that I would save, what is that, 38? So 38 megabytes at 7,000 bytes per config, you're talking about 450 years of configurations, right? So that's an awful long time, is the point I'm trying to make. So the concern that, oh my God, if we set this up, we're going to fill the flash card up and the router's going to crash and all hell's going to break loose. That's not going to you're probably going to be retired by the time that happens. So again, not a very dangerous thing to do. But if your configs are huge, take that into account. But that's a quick way to figure out, if you're saving it to flash, how many configs that you could auto-magically save over. All right, so we've got this set up. We talked about what the 10 means and the fact that it is not how many configs are going to be physically saved out to that flash card, right? It's just simply how many we're going to see here in this archive setup that we've got. Okay, so let's go ahead and say do show run section archive. And we've got the right memory command. And so the time period command, and this is what I use, is I use 43200, and it's minutes. If I were to back up, you can see it's number of minutes to wait between archive configuration. So I think it's 43,200 is a month. So once a month, right? And if you're running for 30 days and you're not having any problems, back that config up, right? So every month, this router will auto-magically archive the current running config off for me, and then it would show up here in this show archive output, right? So now we've got a copy of the archive configuration. We know we've got a good backup copy. We've got the time period set up. It's automatically, every time we say do write mem, it's going to save it off for us. The path has been set up. We're not going to tweak the maximum yet because I'm going to try to get beyond that maximum of 10. Although I guess you could shrink it down. But I think if I shrink it, it's going to erase what we already have. So we'll just leave it at 10. So now you can take a look at the rollback parameters, right? So the rollback filter, there's this adaptive feature. I have never been able to find anything on that feature. However, there's another rollback feature, which is the retry timeout, right? So you may want to manipulate the retry timeout. Maybe you've got, you want it to wait just in case, and this is number of seconds, so we'll say, 15 seconds. So we'll let the retry timer go for 15 seconds before it finally says, hey, I'm unable to roll back. Now, when might you want to use this? Well, remember again, we said that you can actually, if your path is out to a TFTP server and you still have connectivity to that server, this is how long it would wait. So if you don't want it to wait a very long time and it simply fails, then you could crank this all the way down to 1 second, right? So basically wait 1 second. I don't know if you want to go that low, but I'm basically saying that after 15 seconds, if I can't reach the config I'm trying to roll back to, then just simply die out and move on. And that's the rollback, the two rollback options. Again, that adaptive, I've never been able to find anything about the adaptive feature. We've got the no command, the max command. Now, here is what I believe to be one of the most important features of the archive feature set is this log, right? So you'll see I say log, we can say config. So log config. And what is this going to do? So I hit log config, I hit enter, and let's put a question mark here. You can see we can set it to its defaults. We don't want to do that. We're not trying to exit out. So the first one is hide keys. Well, I think we need to talk about what this feature is going to do before it becomes clear what the hide keys is about. So this is actually going to log all the commands that are run on this router. And this is a phenomenal feature. Because how many times has the junior network guy said, hey, this isn't working anymore, but I didn't change anything. And then you get on there only to find out that, the running config had been changed, and the junior guy says, no, I definitely didn't change that. Well, this is going to be the definitive way to see who's changing things, right? And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So we've got this hide keys option. So basically, if the user has to enter a password in, it's going to hide that password. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say we want it to hide any password keys, right? Now, we've got this logging option here. So I have to enable the config logger. So I'm going to say logging enable. I'm going to say logging. Now you'll see we've got this persistent option. Now the persistent option means you can write this off. If I were to say log persistent question mark, you can see I can say auto, oops, sorry, put in the greater than sign there. I can have it automatically save them off to persistent storage, or I could have them, and by persistent storage I mean we can save it off to like a hard drive, a flash drive. Reload, I can have it apply persisted commands on reload. Now I do not use this option here because I don't want it actually to apply the commands, because if we reload I want to start fresh, right? So logging persistent auto, and I'm going to have it automatically log things off. And you can see it says, but it's operationally down. And so we're going to come back to that. So we've got it set up to be persistent. The other options we have with logging are going to be the size of the log. Now, 1,000 commands is going to be the max. The default is 100. So I am a huge believer in trying to save and capture as much forensic information as I can. I've been involved in hundreds of troubleshooting scenarios in my career where I have literally begged to have more data on what was done on the router. And so I always err on the side of I would rather have all that junk, right, all those commands, and not need it than need to see something and not have it. So I'm going to push it out to 1,000, right? And I think that was the last one we were looking at. So that's how many commands are going to be kept by the config log. So we're still in the logging setup here. Notify, right? So I can send these to a syslog server, and I'm going to send them in plain text. I could set it as XML, but I'm also going to have these sent to a syslog server to keep track of. And then we're going to come back, and the last one I believe is record. So we'll take a look at record and record the PRC result, right? So I typically don't use this, but we'll go ahead and throw it in there anyway. We'll say record RC. So now what does our archive section look like? Do show run section archive. And again, I've got a sort of a config that you can use at the end of the document if you choose to download the document. So this is what we look like right now, right? We've got our log configuration set up. We've got the path as to where the archive configs are going to go. We've got the rollback, retry timeout value, write memory, and the time period. So if I say do show archive, let's take a look at what we've got. Right, these are the 3 archive configurations that we have. We've currently got 3 saved. Our max is 10. So now we're going to do the use case here, and let me go ahead and say, oops, sorry, let's get into global config, and we're going to say, I'm going to say enable secret, and we'll just say ABC123. All right, so, and you can see there is the hide keys. This is the result of the hide keys. You can see we've got this parser. So again, the facility, the syslog facility is parser. The severity level is 5, which is notifications. And then the mnemonic config log logged command was done by the user console, because I'm in the console port, so it's just telling me that that's your user console. And then logged command was enable secret. So what if I wanted, so before we move over to the DC router to telnet into Siberia, what if I wanted to see that? So if I say show archive, show archive log config. So this is a great way to audit things. So I can say show archive log config all. It's going to show me everything. I can say statistics. Let's take a look at the statistics, because you're probably wondering how much memory is going to be used here. Well, 3,914 bytes is being saved off. Now, the difference between this, right? Remember, this is being held in memory, okay? So it's in the DRAM on the device. How do we see that? We say show version, and this is always one of the most confusing things for students. So there is the amount of memory. Now, I would have loved if Cisco would have on one line said that this is the what's the word I'm looking for? It's not the total amount of memory being used. It's breaks it down into two parts. You've got the I/O memory, which is on the right-hand side there, and then we've got. Give me 2 seconds here, because I think I made a note about covering this. Yeah, packet memory. The packet memory and the I/O memory. Yeah, so we've got the packet memory and then the I/O memory. And so when you look at it in terms of, and again, I apologize here, I'm taking a quick look real quick here at this note that I made. And I'm trying to read my writing and it's just a mess. Yeah, so you've got the dynamic RAM and packet memory. So this is your DRAM, right? But it's carved up into two portions. So this is kind of everything that you've got here, and this is for I/O, right? So again, referred to as packet memory, because this is a router, it's switching packets. So right now I'm saying I've got 32,768 kilobytes, right, or 32 megs of memory dedicated to, what am I trying to say here? Dedicated to routing packets, right, to packet memory. And then for everything else, right, we've got 360 megs. So if I were to add these two numbers together, let's pull the calculator back out. And again, this is always one of the confusing things when you talk about it. So if I was to say 360,448 plus 32,768, what do we get? We get 393,216. Well, if I divide that by 1,024, right, because we're dealing with memory sizes here, not network speeds and feeds, I get 384. And it just so happens that this Cisco 1841 router has 384 megabytes of dynamic random access memory. You can see down here the DRAM 64 bits wide with parity disabled. But in order to figure out how much DRAM you have, you add these two numbers together, divide by 1,024. Now again, remember that this memory here is saved off for I'm drawing a complete. It looks like the primary memory, right? So the iOS software gets held in here, right? When it gets loaded in, not when it's on flash, right? But that flash file is pulled into DRAM. That is where the actual iOS is running from in memory. So we've got 360 megabytes of space in there, and then for the switching of packets, we've got 32 megs. Again, you can tweak those numbers if you'd like. When we talk about the logging setup, you'll see that logging will take up space, but you can tweak that. You could also, there's a command if you wanted to change the memory. I think it's memory size, IO mem. So this is where you can say, okay, I want 30% of that 384 megabytes to be used for IO memory, right? So if I was to say IO mem 30 and hit enter, you can see that it's not going to take effect until we reload, but that these numbers would change, right? That those numbers would change. So back to the logging of the commands. Those are being saved in memory. Now, we use the persistent option, but you saw that that was disabled. So right now, when I say, pull that command back up, archive statistics, you know, this is how much space we're taking up for the session. And as we run more and more commands, configuration commands, it's going to take up more and more space. But again, there's no way, if even at 1,000, right, 1,000 commands, you're not going to be taking up 300 megabytes of memory, right? So be aware of that, that's how you can see the statistics. But what we really want to look at here is not just the statistics, but we also want to see that we can see it by user. And then I could say, okay, show me all of the commands in memory that the user console has, that the user console has run and the first record number to display will start with 0, right? And there's the hide keys advantage again, right? It's just simply going to hide that password. And so this is what that logging feature set under the archive feature set is going to allow you to do. And you talk about auditability, right? And forensic information, being able to go back and see what was done. This is a phenomenal way to see that. But remember, when I reload, it's going to pull it off of there. If I wanted it to be applied, what would happen is I would have to go back in to the archive feature set, right? Sorry, threw the question mark in there by habit. I'd have to get back into log config, and we would have to say logging, and where was I at? Persistent and reload, right? I'd have to say logging persistent reload. So now, and again, you can see it's logging the command. So now it's going to actually apply those commands that I've got saved off here when I say, and this is just for the user, there's more commands in here, but or there would be more commands in here if you had multiple people making changes. So all of these would be applied. They're going to persist across a reload of the device. And so this may be something you want to do if you have a feeling that, hey, someone's doing something they're not supposed to be doing, the router's crashing, and I want to see what those commands are, is that these will be applied and they would be put back onto the router when the router reloads, right? Or reloads, sorry. Okay, so we're set up and we're good to go there. So now let's come over to DC. So let's go ahead and see what can happen. So we're going to go into privilege exec here. I'm going to say telnet to 198.51.99.1. Username admin, password admin. So as you can see, I'm on router 1. So I've telnetted from the District of Columbia, right, from DC. I'm telnetted all the way to this router that's in Siberia. And now I'm going to get on here and I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to go into the interface and let's say FA00, and I mistakenly say IP address 192.168.1.1, thinking that that's what I was supposed to do. Now you'll notice what just happened. Exactly. I changed what we're pretending to be the WAN interface. I have just lost connectivity to this router in Siberia. We are dead in the water. And so until that router is powered off and powered back on, we are not going to be able to get to that router. So again, I'm consoled in over here, and take a look. The console logging, right? Because by default, everything, all levels from debugging and numerically lower are going to show up here on my screen because I'm consoled in. So thank goodness I happen to be consoled into the router. I can see, hey, wait a minute. What did this guy just do? Yeah, you're not supposed to do that. That's not the IP address. Getting global config here. Interface FA00. The IP address is supposed to be 198.51.99.1. Right? So let's put the IP address back to what it was supposed to be. If I come over here, you can see that there we go. So connectivity was restored. But again, you can see the danger of making remote changes if for some reason you think you may lose connectivity. Now, let's compare and contrast what I'm going to get ready to show you here, which is the revert rollback feature set and the reload in. So as soon as I get logged in, right, as soon as let's get back to privilege exec. As soon as I get logged into the Siberia router, this is what a lot of individuals will do. Because if your archive configs are off somewhere at some data center that you've got to get out that WAN interface to get to, and you lose connectivity, you can clearly see that once you lose connectivity, that's it, it's game over. So what a lot of people do is they'll use reload in. So let me go ahead and let's take a step back here. So here I am in DC. I'm going to telnet to the router in Siberia because I'm getting ready to make this really important change. I log in as the user admin, password admin. The first thing I do is I say reload in, and I'm going to put it, I'll just put it at 30, right? So I'll put it artificially, and that's 30 minutes, so it's minutes, right? So I'm going to say 30. Reload in 30. Configuration's been saved. I'll say, no, I don't want to save the config. And so you can see here that we received this information. Reload scheduled in 30 minutes. So what this means is that in 30 minutes, the Siberia router is automatically going to reboot, unless I cancel the reload. And so part of your change configuration should be that, okay, I'm on the router. Let me get in here. I'm going to make my change. So here we go. So what's something innocuous? So we'll say line con 0 logging synchronous. And what that means is that when there's log messages that come up, you should see it here, I believe, or actually, we're telnet'ed in. So logging to the monitor is not turned on. You'll notice I'm not seeing any syslog messages here. So let's do that too. Oops, sorry, let's do that too. So I'm going to say logging monitor, and we're going to take it down to informational. So now, any syslog, actually, let's do, make sure we get this right. Yeah, logging monitor informational. So now I should see to this VTY line, I should see any syslog messages that come up. So if I would say do clear counters, is always a favorite one here. Say do clear counters, it's going to clear counters. I should see a syslog message, and I don't. Let me turn buffered logging on real quick here and see 8192 and informational. Yeah, because with the logging monitor on, we should see clear counters, unless I'm missing something here. Yeah, I'm going to have to figure out, I have to take a look at why this is. So I should see it with the logging monitor on. I should see those messages coming up. So show logging. Let's take a look real quick here. You can see we've changed it to informational. And the buffered logging is working because now we're seeing it here, but I should see it coming on the VTY line. So let me circle back. We'll come back to that. But yeah, I should see it popping up here on the VTY line, but I'm not for whatever reason. So again, we're on the Siberia router. If I were to say show reload, you can see that in 27 minutes, this router is going to reboot. So we made a couple changes, and I'm happy with the changes. I still got my connectivity, so what I need to make sure I remember to do is I save the configure. Oops, sorry. I should have probably said no IP domain name lookup, but we're going to have to wait here for a second. But what's going to happen is you want to make sure you cancel the reload. Right, so this is one option that you can use when you're making changes on a distantly remote, super remote router. And again, it doesn't even have to be super remote. If you're going to have to send somebody to the facility to power off and power on the router, there we go. And in fact, let me get that on here. No IP domain lookup. If you're going to have to send somebody to a remote location in order to power off and power on a router, because of a configuration mistake, this is one way to deal with that. So how do we cancel the reload? Well, I just simply say reload, and you can see cancel, right? And that's going to cancel the reload of the router. And so now we're good. So again, I telnet it onto the router. I type reload in 30. I've got 30 minutes to make my changes, and then to cancel the reload before the router were to reload. But the good news is that if I made that mistake, the router would then reload, right? And so let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to save the configuration off, right? I'm going to exit out. I come back in to make another change. So we'll say admin, admin. Here I am, I'm on the router, I'm using the reload in option. I'm going to say reload in 1. So in 1 minute, if I don't cancel the reload, it's going to reload. And you can see shut down in 1 minute. So I decide I'm in a big hurry. I'm like, okay, getting ready for the weekend interface. fast Ethernet 00, IP address 198, and I'm going to typo this. We'll say 51.100.1 is what I thought we were changing the IP address to, or maybe it was another interface I was going to be changing the IP address to. I hit enter, and I've just locked myself out of the router, right? So we've got to put somebody on a plane, a bus, a train, something to get to this facility in Siberia. However, I was smart enough to schedule a reload in 60 seconds. And so what should happen here very quickly, and I won't be able to see it there, but over here if I said do show reload, right, 10 seconds. So in 10 seconds, this router is auto-magically going to reboot, and we save the config off before we did our change, so we're going to end up with the most recent version of that configuration that we saved, right? Because we saved it from the running config off to NVRAM, and then here we go. And now the router is going to reload, and we should probably lose our connection over here when this is going to time out. And so we'll wait a second here for this to reload. So this is one way that you can deal with remote changes, right? However, it is going to reboot the router, right? Or the switch, whatever the device is, it's going to do a reload of that device. But again, the trade-off is, hey, I've lost remote connectivity anyway, so I can't get to the router. So yeah, we're going to have to go ahead and reboot it. It doesn't matter. All right, so let me pause here real quick, and I'm going to come back online as soon as the reload is complete and we can get logged back in. All right, so the router finished its reboot, and let's go ahead now and get logged back in here. So we're on the console. Remember, this is from the console. I'm going to type enable, and remember, we set the enable password to ABC123. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, man, you did the reload in, and that saved us. But remember, show run section archive. When we said logging persist reload, right? And logging persist auto. Let's talk about what those two commands did. If I go back into archive and say, oops, log config, and then logging persist. So remember auto. It says auto was log configuration commands automatically. And that's what we want, right? We want it logging the configuration commands. However, the reload, apply persisted commands on reload. Remember, this is the application, or it's going to put those commands that it finds in the logged command sets back on the router. So when we were telnetted in and we made the change to the router, that command got logged. If I do Control U and we say in and I say show archive, or not show archive, sorry, show archive config log, or log config, sorry about that, log config and all. Remember, these commands, this command here, that single command, logging persistent reload, results in all of these commands being applied to the router when it reloads. So in other words, the bogus command that it logged when we were remotely logged in, that gets applied. And so when I come back over here to router 2, right, we try to telnet back over, or come to DC, we try to telnet over to Siberia, it doesn't work. And why is it not working? Show run interface FA00, because we told the router on reload to apply all of these commands again. And that command right there was applied when the router came back up. So let's fix this. Let's go to global config and let's say archive, whoops, sorry, RCH archive. And then, oops, sorry, log config. And we're going to say do show run section archive. Let's make sure we get the right command here. We're going to say no logging persistent reload. And so what we just did was we basically said, yeah, automatically every command that gets run on this router, log it. We want to keep it, right? And that's great. This is a phenomenal thing to do. But this command, logging persistent reload, applies those commands. So if you enter the bogus command in, and we were remotely, connected in, even with the reload in option, it's going to reapply that bogus command, and we don't want that. So let's go ahead and say write mem, and let's get back. Actually, what I wanted to do was let's get back in the global config interface FA00. Let's put the right IP address on here, 198.51.99.1. Right, let's save the config. Whoops. All right, so here you are. The scenario now without that on there is we're going to telnet in. All right, we're going in as admin. So we're logged in as the user admin. Let's get into global config, and we're going to make that, I'm sorry, before we do that, we'll say reload in 1 minute. The config has been saved. Sure, let's save the configuration. So it's going to reboot the router in 1 minute. There we go. Unless I say reload, cancel, but we're not going to do that. We're going to force another reload here. So I get into global config, I'm going to say interface fast Ethernet 00, and let's, again, fat finger, the IP address. IP address 1.1.1.1, because that's what I thought it was supposed to be. And there you go. I've just lost connectivity to the router again. And you can see it logged it over here. So real quickly, if I say show reload, we've got 31 seconds before the reload. If I say show archive, sorry, I keep saying config log instead of log config all. Take a look at the last commands that were run down here. And here we go. Take a look now. See these commands run by console because it was applying them. Here we've got admin at VTY, so you can quickly see who was doing what. I could say config user and say, hey, what was admin doing? What? Oh, and I think our minute is up. Yeah, our minute is up. And we didn't get the command in there quick enough. Let me see if I can get it in. No. All right, so we're reloading. So this is going to be 3 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and pause here real quickly, and let's see when the router comes back up, if it goes back, if it reverted back to the correct IP address. So we'll be right back. All right, so the Siberia router has reloaded, right? I'm in the console port here. Let's get into privilege exec ABC123. So there we are. And remember, before we had the archive logging persistent reload command on there. Show run section archive. Do we have it on there anymore? We do not, right? We removed it. So it should not have applied. Show archive. Right, so there's the archive, and then we say show archive log config all. Whoops. And you can see that there are all the commands, right? These are the commands that it was running as it came up. But it's not the list of commands that were on here before. And so again, right, the devil's in the details with these two options, the logging persistent the details with the logging persistent reload. With logging persistent reload, it's going to reapply all the commands that it has when the box comes up. But that's not what we want, right? Because if a mistake got made, it's going to reapply that mistake. So we pulled that out. And then when the router comes up, these are the configuration commands that it's, applying that startup config to the running config, and here are the commands that are being run to make that happen. So now we should be able to come back over to router 2, and you can see the connection was closed there. Can I telnet back? Boom, just saved myself, right? So just using reload in is a super, super easy way to cover yourself. Now, remember that you had better cancel the reload, or else you end up with that unexpected reload in the middle of the working day that you didn't think was going to happen. So that's reload in. And that's how we need to be careful with the archive feature set when we're setting it up. Because even with reload in, if we have logging persistent reload on there, it's going to apply all those bogus changes, and it's not going to do what we think it's going to do. We're going to have to send somebody there, and they're actually going to have to console into the router and pull that logging persistent reload out of the archive log config feature. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about is the archive, right? The revert rollback. How do we do that? So this is sort of I don't want to say a more elegant way, right? But this is kind of a less intrusive way to keep a backup or to have automatically, roll back out of where we're at. So here we go. So I have a good config, right? If I say write memory, let's save off this and this is our, our baseline config, our golden config. I say show archive. You can see here's the most recent version. And so when we do this config revert command, this is the most recent archive config. That is the one that is going to be used to roll back to. So here we go again. I come over here. I'm going to make a remote change. Admin, admin. You can see we get into privilege exec. Our privilege level is 15 on this user. And this is how we're going to do this. And again, this is all detailed in the document there that's out on Dropbox. So usually I say config T, right? And just go into config T. Well, there's some options we can use here. Revert, config terminal revert, timer. How long do I want to wait in minutes? So I'm going to set this to 2. And there's a reason I'm going to set it to 2, because at 60 seconds or 1 minute to go, we're going to get a notification telling us, hey, you've got 60 seconds to either complete your work or to extend the amount of time, right? So I say config terminal revert timer 2. So we get some messages here. Rollback confirm change, backing up current running config. So now it creates it auto-magically creates a golden copy for us, right? Because I just got logged in. I'm saying, hey, I've got 2 minutes. I'm going to get this work done. So that is the config that we're going to roll back to in 2 minutes. So watch what happens here. I'm going to change the host name to this, right? And that's just a mess of a host name. And I'm going to go ahead, and I'm not going to change the IP. Do show IP interface brief. I won't change the IP on the WAN interface. But if I went into interface fast Ethernet and I said, oh yeah, that's right, I'm supposed to put 2.2.2.2. That's what the IP for that interface was supposed to be, and maybe that just cut all your LAN connectivity off to this router. And then I say, okay, things are looking good, and actually let's go ahead and change that WAN IP. So we've made a number of changes here. So interface FA00, and I want to wait until we see that 60-second warning. So how would you see the rollback timer? It's a little different here. If I were to say do show archive config revert or rollback timer, right? So this shows me I wish it would show you how much time you have left down to the second, but it doesn't. What it tells you is that that's when you configured it. So in order for me to figure out how much time I've got left, I'd have to say do show clock and compare 14:48:36, 14:50:10, right? So what do we notice here? We're not seeing any kind of a warning, right, coming to the VTY lines. So if I was to say, and let's go ahead and change that interface, IP address 1.1.1.1, oh wait, interface fast Ethernet 00. Well, it looks like I missed it. So the command execution is locked, right? Because it was rolling us back. Now there was a bunch of stuff going on here that we were not receiving any notifications about, right? And you can see what happened to the host name. The host name changed back. What does show run interface fast Ethernet 01 look like? Yeah, there's no IP on there. So it auto-magically rolled us back. And here, take a look what was happening, right? Because this was all being logged. Roll back to the config flash is going to take place unless you want to extend your time, right? And then it tells you, hey, we're rolling back to that version of the config. Remember that 103.2? That was the one that it saved. So let's come back over here to router 2, and we're going to go ahead and say, we're going to do it again. So we're going to say config terminal, and this time we're going to extend our timeout. Config terminal, revert timer, and I'll say 2, right? So there we go. It auto-magically creates an archive config. Remember, this revert feature, or the rollback feature, is inextricably linked to the archive feature. We have to have the archive feature set on to do this. But again, take a look at that. I mean, it was instantaneous. It pulled that configuration. It rolled it back instantaneously. No reload, no sitting around for 3 minutes having to wait for the box to reload and then come back up, you know, where maybe a whole host of other things might be going on. So here we are. I'm going to get into interface fast Ethernet 01, IP address 1.1.1.1. Right, so I've just made this bad change. I don't realize I've made the bad change because I've cut the LAN segment off possibly. And then I realize, oh, you know what? It's going to take me longer than 60 seconds to fix this. So again, when I say show archive, config, rollback, timer, again, whoops, show clock. Again, I've got to look at when it says it was configured, add 2 minutes of that time, so 14:53:49, and then quickly come over here and say, well, you know, what time is it right now? 14:52. I wish it would be simple code that Cisco would add in, you know, time remaining before rollback, right? Not show me the configured time, right? I'd like to see that as well, but maybe the line below is time remaining before rollback initiated, and then give me the time down to the second, you know, like if there's 30 seconds to go or 20 seconds to go. So I realize right now, you know what? Oops, sorry. Config revert. Let me stretch this out a little bit. Config revert timer, and we'll set it to 15 minutes. So what I've just done is config revert timer. I've just added, or I should say reset. I shouldn't say added. Reset the absolute amount of time that I have to make the change that I wanted to make. So take a look at 14:53:32. So we had 17 seconds before it would have rolled back. I issue this command, and I just reset the timer. The absolute timer has been reset to 15 minutes. So now I've got until 15:08:32 to do what I need to do and be done. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go back into interface fast Ethernet 01, and I'm going to say no IP address because I realize, hey, I put the wrong IP address in there, or there wasn't supposed to be an IP address in there. And let's put the correct IP. So 192.168.1.1. And I'm happy with this change, right? Now remember, just like the reload in, if I don't cancel the reload, it's going to reboot the router, and then it's going to go back to the most recently saved configuration. So once you're done here, once I've decided, you know what, hey, that's great, I test my connectivity, we can get to the LAN segment, everything is looking good, all I need to do to cancel the rollback is to say configure confirm, right? And there's no options to that. So config confirm basically says, is that's me saying, hey, I'm happy with how everything is running, and I don't want you to roll the configuration back, right? So what if an hour from now someone comes to me and says, hey, we didn't want to use 192.168.1.1. We know that that works as the default gateway, but that's not the address that that we want. In fact, we're going to take a look at it in a couple months, and I just want you to just roll back for me to the previous version of the config. So if I were to say show archive, remember that that was the version of the config, that was the most previous version. So now I'm going to talk about config replace. And you saw this in the previous video when we were talking about moving back and forth between configurations. So if you want to do a wholesale rip and replace, right, or rip and run of the config, you can use config replace. And so how would I do that? I would simply say config replace, and then I give the absolute path name down to the configuration that I want to apply. And so again, actually, before we do this, let's go ahead and say show run interface fast Ethernet 01. And there you can see that we've got the bogus IP address on there. And now I'm going to go ahead and say config replace, and we'll paste this. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to ask me, are you sure you want to do this? I'm going to say yes. And take a look at how quickly, look at that, one pass, rollback done. So show run interface fast Ethernet 01. And that's it, right? So this is a great way to quickly move between the different configurations. So once I'm satisfied with what I have, I would issue the write memory, right? Or the copy running config startup config command. And what is this going to do? You've got it. So with no IP address on that interface, we now have that configuration is now saved off. And remember, these are entire complete configurations. This is not just little snippets of configurations. So let's say that I wanted to, let's say, config, replace. There's a way to compare. Where are we at? Config, archive. We want to compare the configs. Archive. Config revert, I think it is. No, hold on one second here. It's config. I thought it was config replace. Yeah, because typically it's not config replace. Typically, the commit confirm. Yeah, I thought there was a way. There's definitely a way to compare the configs, and typically I don't. But you can see the difference. It's like running the diff command on the Unix platform, and I apologize that I can't recall. Yeah, for the life of me, I can't remember. So I apologize. So there's a way to compare the configs. It'll show you like, hey, this is the difference between the two configs. And I swear, this is bugging me. Configure terminal. No, it's revert. No, it's not that. It's not config replace. Yeah, I apologize. I can't remember the command to compare the two configs. But there is a command that you can use to compare the two configs. All right, so this is going to wrap up sort of the how to make changes on remote routers supplement to the class. And we talked about this a lot. And again, you want to save the configurations locally if you think you're going to, you wanted to do it from a TFTP server. When you lose that WAN connectivity, you're not going to be able to get to those configurations. But again, there's, trade-offs with each. If you save them locally, you're going to take up some space, not a whole lot, but you're going to take space up. If you save it at the TFTP server and you do something that cuts that remote connectivity, you're probably going to want to use the reload in option if that's the way you're going to go. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully this cleared up the archive feature set, as well as the logging feature set, as well as reload in, and it's really given you a good idea as to how you should approach making changes on routers that you may have to put somebody in a card to go get to if you make a mistake that cuts your connectivity off. All right, thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.